Welcome, everyone, to another chat at the Hearthside. I am Owen McCarthy, and I'll be the one with you today with the update. Today will be a look at the current situation with the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Rafah operation is well underway, and the U.S. Navy has finished construction of the temporary dock for aid deliveries. Leaders of both Israel and Hamas with potential ICC arrest warrants, and much more with today's episode. For many, this is a very hot topic of fierce debate. We will not be discussing the politics of this, and we are just going to be looking at the situation on the ground. Either way you look at it, this is a horrible loss of human life that has to have been continually going on. This is not something that is sustainable, nor is this something that anyone wishes to see. Now, let's get into what is currently going on with the situation on the ground. So, U.S. aid, humanitarian, and arms shipments is what we're going to be covering first. So, as we see in the pictures, the dock is complete. I did see where one of those barges there that you see on the upper picture did go aground, I believe yesterday or the day prior. So, we are seeing some things where it's not always going to be most cut and dry situation here, but aid deliveries have commenced, and some of them have been coming with routes agreed upon with Egypt until further measures can be taken to stabilize the routes through Rafah. Now, with the pier, in this, we are seeing aid shipments are rolling across. Now, trucks carrying badly needed aid for the Gaza Strip rolled across the newly built pier into the besieged enclave for the first time as of Friday, as Israeli restrictions on border crossings and heavy fighting hindered the delivery of food and other supplies. This shipment is the first in an operation that the American military officials anticipate could scale up to at least 150 trucks a day. Now, Israel is pressing forward on its front to Rafah, and it is going on now 7 months in its offensive against Hamas. The one thing is that this is not going to be the perfect substitute for land deliveries that could bring more food, water, and fuel that are needed into Gaza. The problem that we are seeing, though, is that there's not good routes for them to go. There's heavy fighting that's still going on, and it is slowing some of that down. Thankfully, with where the U.S. and Egypt have finally kind of gotten some common ground working, they've got some of those aid shipments going back through into Gaza to help with the refugee situation and making sure people are able to get the medical aid that they need. The nice thing is, too, that we do have confirmation that the first shipments have gone across the pier in order to supplement what has not been able to go essentially across any sort of land routes. Now, in an article from Ireland's RTE, 800,000 are forced to flee Rafah since the start of the Israeli operation, according to the UNRWA. The heads of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees has said that 800,000 people have been forced to flee Gaza's far southern city of Rafah since Israel began military operations there this month. Nearly half of the population of Rafah, or 800,000 people, are on the road, having been forced to flee since the Israeli forces started the military operation in the area on the 6th of May. So, you got a lot of people that have been displaced, and we'll touch a little bit more on that going into a little bit later, but there's a lot of people that don't have stable home, housing, food, water. And some of those people are going to require medical aid. So it's good that these supplies are getting there. It's just a matter of making sure that Hamas is not, hampering with any of these deliveries or the Israelis, because people need these more than they need to continue fighting right now. This area in Gaza is some of the most densely populated, so it's definitely in that time frame where it now is where these things are needed. Now, another thing that has gotten a little more ire, especially with what's all going on in and around Rafah and the Gaza operation, the U.S. House went around Joe Biden's administration in unfreezing weapons to Israel. The GOP forced a bill and it voted and unfroze the weapons assets. The U.S. House Representatives passed the Israeli Security Assistance Support Package last Thursday. The Republican bill was put up in response to the Biden administration's pause on a bomb transfer to Israel. The bill prevents President Biden from withholding weapons transfers to Israel. The majority of Democrats and a handful of Republicans voted no. But with 16 Democrats voting for it, the House Republicans were able to pass this bill. You are either with Israel or you are not, said House Speaker Mike Johnson. The Speaker, Mike Johnson, was a champion of the bill. The Biden administration is defying the will of Congress and withholding weapons shipments to Israel, said Johnson. So, it is definitely a two-edged sword. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Israel is definitely having some issues with civilian casualties with some of these strikes because they're not using guided munitions in some cases. For example, just yesterday there was a bombing in one of the Rafah refugee camps and killed many. So it is not good for the Israeli military to be having these things happen as they're trying to fight an ingrained terrorist organization within Gaza, such as Hamas. So it's not the easiest situation, but counterinsurgency is definitely one of the toughest things to deal with. The U.S. has dealt with for the last 20 years before we pulled out of Afghanistan. That is something that was an issue. So it's something to take a look at and consider, because yes, there is the ability to, but is there the willpower of the military to do what's necessary for full counterinsurgency? And if so, then the operations that they're planning are not going to be as thought out as needed. Another thing that is taken into account is Hamas has been shown to be using civilian infrastructure ingrained with their military network. Schools, hospitals, like public universities, things of that nature have been used, or even infrastructure have been gutted to create bombs and weapons against Israel. And Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2004. So there's no real good solution right now because of the animosity that's felt from the October 7th attacks. And it's definitely strained a lot of things, and it's a very tense situation. And it's just a shame that there is not a way right now that I see currently until some of these more deep-seated anger and hatred towards one another is able to be put aside. I don't see how they can get a successful two-state solution implemented. It's what's needed. It's necessary, so then that way there is a recognized Palestine, but there's also a recognized Israel. So it is a tough situation, and it's hard to see because there is a lot of innocents that are caught right in the middle because of just what Hamas has ingrained themselves into, and just disregard for certain practices by the Israeli military. I mean, there are things that they could be doing to avoid some of these civilian casualties. Now, we're going to get a little bit more into the state of the conflict now. So, a couple of these pictures here are going to be from the Rafah operation of Merkava tanks. I believe these are either Merkava 4s or Merkava 3s. And they are, as they're pushing through Rafah. Now, it is not anything that's going to be pleasant when covering a war like this, but this is stuff that needs to be known. Sorry. So, Sullivan, which is one of the U.S. representatives, okay? He has pressed Netanyahu for a more focused military campaign within the Gaza Strip. It is needed, it's necessary, it's what is going to help make sure things are able to be taken care of. The U.S. Press Secretary, National Security Advisor, not Press Secretary, Jake Sullivan, meets with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem. In here, during this meeting on Sunday with the Israeli Prime Minister and the other Israeli leaders to discuss an ambitious U.S. plan for Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel and help the Palestinian Authority govern Gaza in exchange for a path to eventual statehood. So, this is something that is what the U.S. has been strongly pushing for, is getting a two-state solution that will get not only recognition from the other major majority Muslim nations that are in the Middle East, but also get Saudi Arabia and Israel on better terms and better relations, because then that will help stabilize a lot of the things too that we're seeing in the Middle East. The big thing is a normalized relations with Saudi Arabia, one of the largest powers in the Middle East, will help ensure that there is a more stable peace within that area and allow for true development between these nations. If they can get those differences set aside and get agreements work together, we may see something concrete actually take hold after some of these conflicts are finally put to bed. Now, Hamas officials in Gaza have a death toll from an Israeli airstrike on, and now I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, so I do apologize, but the Nusriat, I believe, high rises, or I'm sorry, just rises to 31. I'm bumbling. Now, that is including 20 injured as well, to add to that. Excuse me, sorry, I had to take a breath. Now, this article that we're getting some of this information from for this part is going to be from Deutsche Welle, or DW. It is a German publication. So the Israeli government on Tuesday stopped the Associated Press news agency from taking a live video feed from Gaza as well. This is not what I was... Sorry. Trying to... At least what I was going to read from. We'll go to... Man. Sorry. Here it is. Targeted The targeted house belonged to the Hassan family, according to Gaza Civil Defense Agency spokesman Mahmoud Basal, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital received 20 bodies from the strike. So it's definitely something that is to be paid attention to. It is. I mean, you're seeing a lot more of these particular strikes calling out civilian casualties. Now, there is going to be what they call the fog of war. And until we can get more third-party people on the ground directly seeing and tallying what's truly being taken, we're going to have to take them at face value and try to come up with our approximations, because the only way we're going to get the real numbers is, unfortunately, not until the after the fact. But these are going to be close, and because of reports that are taken to the hospital, especially those of the dead. So I am more inclined to see something like that when it comes from a hospital where they are being taken to like the morgue or to be treated and they pass away from injuries. That's where you're going to see a little more. Now, another article, and this is coming from Reuters. Israel pushes further into parts of northern Gaza, and new cracks form in the Netanyahu coalition as dozens killed and wounded as the Israeli forces thrust deeper into Gaza, Jabalia, and Rafah. Israeli troops and tanks pushed on Saturday into parts of a congested northern Gaza Strip district that they had previously skirted in the more than 7-month-old war, killing and wounding dozens of Palestinians, medics and residents said. Israeli forces also took some ground in Rafah, a southern city by the Egyptian border that is packed with displaced people and where the launch this month of a long-threatened incursion to crush holdouts of Palestinian Islamist militant group Hamas has alarmed Cairo and Washington. Exposing further cracks in the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, Benny Gantz, a centrist member of the war cabinet, threatened to resign if the right-wing leader does not agree by June 8th to a day-after plan that would include how Gaza might be ruled after the war with Hamas, which is our segue into the next slide here. In what the Israeli media said was the result of intelligence gleaned during the latest incursions, the military announced the recovery of the body of a man who was amongst more than 250 hostages seized by Hamas in the cross-border rampage on October 7th that triggered the war. So, we are seeing now some other repercussions, though, from these operations. The ICC arrest warrants and casualties with the war. The ICC is seeking arrest warrants for both Netanyahu and top Hamas leaders. The man that you see to the left of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is one of the militant leaders of Hamas. He is one of the main people cited in their arrest warrant for that. And what I would see happen, so ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan requested arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and top Hamas leaders Yawaz Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and Ismail Haniyeh on charges of war crimes. Charges include war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the Gaza conflict, with specific actions cited for Sinwar, Netanyahu, and Gallant. The charges against the Hamas leaders include crimes such as extermination, murder, hostage-taking, rape, and sexual assault, while Netanyahu and Gallant are accused of causing extermination, starvation, and targeting civilians. So this is something that came out just at the tail end, in the mid of last week. The prospect of arrest warrants for Israeli leaders over their war in Gaza has united an increasingly divided country in opposition to the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu holds nearly unprecedented low approval ratings domestically, but few Israelis are likely to say his conduct or that of Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is on par with Hamas's intentional targeting of civilians on October 7th. Israelis understand this is a serious issue that is unprecedented, said Shmuel Rosner, a senior fellow at Jewish People Policy Institute, who has conducted regular polling of the Israeli public before and after the Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel. We feel frustrated, angry, but we also have to be realistic. We have to deal with it. And this comes from The Hill. It's unclear whether ICC prosecutor Karim Khan's request to the court to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, along with 3 Hamas leaders, will be fulfilled. So, if so, there's going to be some fallout that comes from that. And it'll be yet to be seen how far that fallout will stretch. Now, we touched on this a little earlier, and that ultimatum raises pressure on Netanyahu for a post-war plan. I mean, one of his senior cabinet members for the war cabinet has put an ultimatum against him to ensure that there is a post-war plan. Mr. Gantz proposed a 6-point plan involving hostage return, ending Hamas's rule, Gaza Strip demilitarization, and international administration with various cooperation. Mr. Netanyahu criticized Mr. Gantz for targeting him with an ultimatum over Hamas, calling the conditions veiled for an Israeli defeat. Mr. Gantz's potential departure would increase Mr. Netanyahu's reliance on far-right allies advocating Gaza's occupation and settlement rebuilding. So this is going to really lean on Netanyahu on whether or not he's going to embrace the hardliners that are supporting him, or is he going to try to keep a more even keel balance to this and try to maintain some sort of semblance of at least mixture of voices instead of just people who are all for, and trying to have more even-handed approaches. It is going to test whether or not Netanyahu is going to maintain some of that, and if not, then it's going to be a sticky situation for Israeli officials getting out of this, because I do not see how they can occupy Gaza and police it. Now, Mr. Gantz's solution might be able to do something that would be beneficial, because as we've seen with Kosovo, but you have to have willing nations, and right now with how high tensions are, a lot of nations are focusing on fortifying the borders already established. So it would be interesting to see if that is something that could bring fruition, but I do not think that it's going to have anything that truly bears fruit. Now, the UN defense casualty tally amid Israeli officials' anger. This has caused some ire from the Israeli side because of some of that. The UN humanitarian aid chief has defended the organization's use of casualty figures in the Gaza war in responses to sharp criticism by Israel. Martin Griffiths told the BBC the UN was very cautious in its approach. Israel earlier said a recent reduction in UN estimates of killed Palestinian women and children suggested it had relied on false data from Hamas. On the 6th of May, the UN said 69% of reported fatalities were women and children. On the 8th of May, it said the figure was 52%. So there is some things where there's either corrections, or they could be using some, false data where they're not getting something that's really holding out. But we're going to be looking at an article from La Libre, from a Belgium publication. Hopefully. I don't know if the auto translate's going to work. Unfortunate. Move on. Israel has said South Africa's genocide case at UN court is divorced from the facts. And when Israel defended its Gaza offensive at the International Court of Justice, opposing South Africa's request to stop operations in Rafah and leave the Palestinian territory. The Israeli Justice Ministry dismissed South Africa's accusations of violating the Genocide Convention, labeling them as inaccurate. Israeli official Noam criticized the genocide claim, stating there is no genocide in Gaza amid the conflict. An article from KETV. At Hague, Israel insists it's doing all it can to protect civilians in Gaza and denies genocide charges. The International Court of Justice wrapped up a third round of hearings on emergency measures requested by South Africa. It said Israel's military incursion in Rafah threatens the very survival of Palestinians in Gaza and has asked the court to order a ceasefire. Israel strongly denied charges of genocide on Friday, telling the United Nations top court it was doing everything it could to protect the civilian population during its military operation in Gaza. The International Court of Justice's third hearing on emergency measures requested by South Africa, asking for the ceasefire, has one spokesman from the Israel legal team, Tamar Kaplan Torgman, defend the country's conduct, saying it had allowed in fuel and medication to the beleaguered enclave. Israel takes extraordinary measures in order to minimize the harm to civilians in Gaza, she told the Hague-based court. A protester shouting "liars" briefly interrupted Kaplan Torgman's final remarks. The hearing was paused for less than a minute while security guards escorted a woman from the public gallery. South Africa told the court on Thursday that the situation in the beleaguered enclave has reached a new and horrific stage and urged judges in order to halt the Israeli military operations, or at least to order a halt. Now, I don't really see where that is going to truly get anywhere because, kind of Israel's kind of been digging their heels in here, and it has really, I understand the need to weed out and get rid of Hamas. But if reports on civilian casualties are holding true, then, there's a lot of people caught in the crossfire. It's the same issue I have with how Russia has even thought to do any sort of conflict in the last 20 years, is they just target all civilian as much as possible. And so it's not acceptable. War is bad enough, and the conflict itself is bad enough, but to have to bring all the innocents into the crosshairs is just unacceptable. And there has to be a way to safeguard civilians as best as possible. And as we saw from an airstrike that hit a Rafah refugee camp, as we talked about earlier, there were civilian casualties in that. So it's not doing any good for them trying to weed out Hamas when all you're doing is driving people either to Hamas or, as they are running from Hamas, you bomb them. So it's not something that is good for anyone, whether you be on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side of the border. No matter which way you look at it, it's just horrendous because people are being put into the same situation the civilian populace of Ukraine, Syria, Myanmar, Niger, Sudan, all these places are being put through that are experiencing conflict. So it does nothing but to further destabilize other areas and bring about even greater destruction and conflict. Now, Israeli finds fallout from the war and calls for help. The Israeli army has found the bodies of 3 hostages taken on the October 7th attack by Hamas. Now, these bodies were including Shani Luke, were found in Gaza after being killed by Hamas at the Nova Music Festival near the Gaza border. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed sorrow over the deaths and vowed to return all hostages living and dead. Netanyahu has struggled to fulfill his promises of eliminating Hamas and rescuing the hostages. Oh, sorry. I'll wipe my nose real quick. All right. An article from the National Post. Shani Lok can rest now, family says, as murdered hostage's body found a few days before her mother's birthday. Her mother says, I think Shani said, let's give my mother a birthday present and let's go back and be closer to her. Her father reportedly said. Shani Lok was one of 3 hostages found dead in Gaza, the Israeli military confirmed recently. Lok's parents, Ricarda and Nissim, were informed of the discovery on Friday, after which her father looked at the photos to confirm his daughter's identity. We also saw the tattoos on her hands, he said on Saturday. The Times of Israel reports, now she will have her own place next to us and we can go there whenever we want and she can rest. The funeral for the 22-year-old is scheduled to be held on Sunday, a day that also happens to be her mother, Ricarda's birthday. I think Shani said, let's give my mother a birthday present and let's go back to be closer to her, is quoted as saying. The 2 other hostages identified on Friday were Ishak Golrenter and Amit Buskila. Luke Golrenter and Buskila were at the Nova Music Festival near the Gaza border when terrorist group Hamas attacked on October 7th. They were killed while trying to escape, and their bodies were taken into Gaza, military spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said during a news conference. Overnight, our troops recovered their bodies and brought them back home to Israel. We will continue operating to bring all of our hostages home. May their memories be a blessing, the Israeli Defense Forces wrote in a post on Instagram on Friday alongside pictures of the 3 victims. We are seeing more and more of this continue to spread, and we will as they continue to recover bodies and find those left alive. And as this drags on, there is a less and less likelihood that they will find someone left that has been taken hostage. And it is sad that there's just not, unfortunately, the ability to get that in. Now, the Israeli War Cabinet has had a threat to quit. Benny Gantz, as we touched on earlier, a member of the War Cabinet and Netanyahu's rival, threatened to leave the government by June 8th if a new war plan for Gaza wasn't formulated. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant emphasized the need for a plan involving Palestinian administration in Gaza and oppose direct Israeli governance. Gantz and Gallant are pushing for a new strategy in Gaza that includes international Arab and Palestinian involvement in civil affairs. So this is really going to be what will truly have something that might take hold to give Palestine some stability. That's the only way. There's no room for Israel to be able to govern that because, one, it's not their land. The Gaza Strip is Palestinian. So we need to ensure that there is fair governance of that, and it is of, something that is maintained. And any subversion of that is just going to bring them back into another conflict that we're seeing now. I mean, as you see, look at the scale of destruction It is immense, just as we've seen in all of these other conflicts, and it's going to require more than likely billions of dollars just to be able to fix what has been broken, and not to count the amount of lives that have been displaced. Now, we are seeing American medics trapped within the Gaza Strip call for help from the U.S. government to help get them home. There is a group of medics who have gone over and have volunteered over there and helping, treat wounded from what has happened. But it has gotten to a point now where they are feeling the need to come home. The FAJR Scientific, a U.S.-based nonprofit, seeks U.S. government assistance for Katan and 16 colleagues trapped in Gaza. They were meant to depart on Monday today. Masab Nasser, FAJR Scientific's CEO in Gaza, urges the U.S. and WHO to aid in evacuating U.S. citizens from the conflict zone swiftly. Despite awareness of risks, Katan and volunteers didn't anticipate being stranded in Gaza. They preferred to leave only if replaced by other medical personnel. Now, I do not think they're going to be able to really get that. But there is a possibility. American medics trapped in Gaza call on the U.S. government to help bring them home. So let's see, this is a WJCL 22 ABC report. Dr. Aliyah Katan should already be back home in California with her 3 young children. Instead, she's spending her days and nights at Gaza's European hospital on the outskirts of Rafah. Katan, an anesthesiologist and specialist in critical care, is one of at least 22 American physicians trapped in Gaza after an Israeli military offensive in Rafah last week shuttered the city's critical border crossing to Egypt. Rafah had until then served as the only entry and exit point for foreign aid workers into and out of Gaza. So, it's going to be hard getting those people out. There's just not going to be a good way to really successfully get them back without any issue, because it is a sticky situation. While the U.S. has that dock, they have already stated we're not going to go as boots on the ground really hardly at all. I mean, technically they are, but they're not, because they're not setting up something there fully on the ground in Gaza. They've got the pier. They're playing the mightiest game of, ooh, I'm not touching it, So it's something to keep an eye at. But it's hard to see. It's a lot of people that are caught in these crossfires. The Rafah operation has put a hamper on that, but hopefully with this temporary crossing that Egypt has kind of called on with the U.S. and agreed upon, that might be something that we can get some movement on. And to touch on that, aid trucks entered Gaza through an agreement bypassing the closed Rafah crossing with Egypt. Egypt demands control of the Gaza side before reopening the Rafah crossing. Temporarily, traffic is redirected through Israel's Kerem Shalom crossing due to inaccessibility caused by nearby fighting. So there's been about 200 aid trucks that have crossed through this crossing, which could give an opportunity for, workers to be able to get out that way. It really just kind of all depends how they're routed and if those medical professionals are even able to get to that crossing given the state of conflict on the ground. So it's going to be an interesting measure to see if they can get that even moving in a direction where they could even get there. But if so, that's going to be their best likelihood to get out. Unless they somehow get to that pier or the U.S. military is willing to put them on one of their boats, I don't see that happening, because then they're having to take on civilian risk. They're most likely not going to want to take them, So more than likely, they're going to have to go through this temporary crossing if they can get there at that Israel-controlled Shalom crossing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for today with us here at Hearthside. I thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, drop a like, subscribe, comment where we need to improve. Let me know what you want to hear next. We're going to be trying to cover Taiwan and China, possibly even something from SpaceX, depending on what comes up with the IFT-4 launch, potentially for June 5th. So feel free to tune in. We're going to try to see what we can cover. I'm going to see if I can get permission to, get some photos from another channel, and if I can use that from some of their live streams, and hopefully get you guys some great photos there. If not, definitely tune into What About It. They have a great 24/7 stream. That's where I'll be watching it from. So be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you guys need to hear from me next and where I can improve. You guys stay safe.